I'm Trixie, aka The Thoughtful Beast. Welcome to my live show, which I have now named Ready to Talk. This is my guest, Jeremy. He's going to be talking today about intersectionality for healing and understanding. Before we get started, there are two things I want to do. So one, I wanted to give a shout out to Dee Dee McClure, SD Bailout. That's the bailout in San Diego. SD stands for San Diego. That's our local bailout in our community. So if you have some money, please think about giving them your donations. They're grassroots in San Diego. So it's going to go directly to our community. Remember that we do have protests going on in San Diego. They're just not being heavily televised anymore, but that does not mean they've gone away. So please remember that. And second, Jeremy's going to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his history. You ready?
Yes. What's up, everyone? So my name is Jermey, J Edmondson. I'm originally from Seattle, Washington. That is where I started out dancing on a team, or a company, I should say, Cutting Up, under the director Tyrone Crosby. I moved to Las Cruces, New Mexico in 2010, and then received my bachelor's in dance in 2014. Took a year off, or allegedly took a year off, but I was still going to school. And then decided to go for my master's in 2016 to 2018. And during my master's was where I was able to research who I am as a person. So I'm African American or Black. I also identify as gay or homosexual, whatever term people want to use. So those two identities really started to stand out to me, and I wanted to research them more and see how they intersect, how they clash, because our intersectionalities can clash. And yeah, and really, how does my Blackness show up more? Because I feel like that is what people see before anything else. So they'll see that I'm Black before I'm gay. They'll see I'm Black before I'm a male. So really understanding how Blackness navigates in these other identities.
Yay! Welcome to the show. Like I told Jerry before, I'm really excited to talk about his topic because I feel like people don't understand how important intersectionality is, because that's really what connects us together. And I know you gave a little bit of a background to I guess why you'd want to talk about this topic. It seems very personal to you. And it seems like it is like a very, not like just recently, but more recently, like a deeper dive into that.
Definitely, I agree. So I'm always trying to figure out, like I said, navigate my Blackness. I'm like, okay, but then me being gay pops up. For me personally, I'm like, okay, when I'm in the gay community, I know that I'm Black because the racism, but then when I'm in my Black community, I know that I'm gay because of homophobia. And I started my own podcast, and so I really was deciding what am I trying to speak at? And I realized I'm just trying to speak to people's intersectionality, like you said, and how it brings us all together because of privilege and oppression, and then being able to dissect our identities within that is how I started being able to bridge and really make myself comfortable in other situations for people who may not understand or don't want to participate in how I live. I don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, like what you said, like the fact that it's so interesting, because I feel like there are a lot of people, like myself included, when you think of like the LGBT community, you feel like, you know, like a big message they always send is like inclusion. But racism definitely does happen. Like it exists in those spaces, which I feel is like, seems like that. Like it seems like, wait, what? But it's true. And I feel like that goes, like with my friends, I have a very close friend who's Chinese and he's gay, and he used to talk to me about, you know, like dating is really hard for him because he's just seen as automatically more feminine, and that sometimes either like plays really badly, where people are like, you are too feminine automatically, even without knowing him, or like he becomes tokenized in almost the same way that Asian women get tokenized.
Definitely. Like... And the fetishization over, I mean, especially the Asian community and Blackness, how people fetishize over us. And research actually says that gay Asian men are more discriminated against than anybody. So, and I didn't know that, you know, so bringing in intersectionality and like, I know what it's like to be discriminated against, just so bridging that, being able to bridge that, because I was like, well, I know people are fetishizing over me. And then I think Grindr, the dating website, whatever, was putting out like all these topics. They're like, well, actually Asian men are really discriminated against in the community. But like you said, especially because like being told that they're feminine and like really seen as these sex, just these sex toys, these sex things. And I'm like, okay. And what happens is so with intersectionality, like you said, it is to bridge us all, it's to bridge us all together. But when we look at our social justice platforms, we don't realize that they're talking to the privileged part of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and once you realize that, then you're like, oh, how am I participating in somebody's oppression? You know, before it's too late. Hopefully you can catch it. So being able to step back and realize that it's not just one, because the LGBT community is speaking towards white cisgendered gay men. That's who it's, you know, that's who runs it, because still the whiteness, they have that privilege over us who are, you know, people of color. Mm-hmm. And so dissecting that and then realizing, like, if I identify as cisgender, then I have, well, I do, but I have privilege over someone who's Asian and who may not identify as cisgender. They may identify as something else, you know? So mm-hmm. being able to break that and realize how the LGBTQIA plus alphabet soup, you know, a whole bunch of letters, is catering to my privilege. Mm-hmm. And that's the issue they're not grasping.
Yes. I agree. I agree. And see, the thing is, like, when I listen to you and like you're talking about like dismantling your own biases and like this is something you're working on, like, and that's so beautiful. And I feel like that's like, yes, like intersectionality is important because of that. But instead, I feel like a lot of the times I hear it being like, oh, well, like, you know, you hear a lot of people being like, well, I'm white, but I grew up poor. So, like, what do you mean? Like, I'm not privileged. And it's like, no, man, you're taking it the wrong way. It's supposed to be like, well, supposed to be, right? It's like, we hope that it would be like, oh, I understand what it is to be poor and then have prejudice against me. So I do want to be for the Black Lives Matter movement because I understand some of their plight. Obviously, it's not all of it, but it's just like, yeah, I get it. And if you solve, you know, like, if that's being solved or that's being addressed in the Black Lives Matter movement, like about poverty, right? And like the lack of help that people get, wouldn't you want to be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But unfortunately, a lot of the time you hear it as like an excuse to invalidate others.
And yes, and it is. And that's why, because I have these kind of conversations with, well, it's mostly little white people, but I have these conversations with other people. And what happens is that, so when I say something, okay, let's bring up like the being poor. And if a white person's like, well, or if anybody, let's just put two bodies, but it's like, well, I grew up poor. And I'm like, okay, now you're talking about economics. That's two different things, racial and economics, gender, and people try to mesh all these things together. I'm like, you can't do that because it's not the same thing. So me being Black and poor is not the same as you being white and poor, because your advantage is race. That's all I'm saying. I'm not blaming you. I'm asking us to investigate. You know, I say that a lot on my podcast. I either ask us to investigate some things or to interrogate, because some things do need to be interrogated, but I leave that up to the person. But you have to be able to investigate your privilege. And you don't have privilege unless your advantages comes with someone else's disadvantages. So your skin color being white versus us who are people of color or Black, yeah, you do have an advantage. It's just, that's the way it works, you know. Even if I was rich and Black, and then they're white and poor, Yeah, I have economic advantage over you. Yes, I'm not saying that I don't, but you have racial privilege over me.
Yeah.
Or racial advantage.
Yeah, and it's, like I know sometimes for me it's like really disappointing because like I just feel like it's straightforward. Like I know I have privilege being an Asian woman, especially because I'm lighter. Like I'm a lighter Asian woman. So it's just like it's this weird thing where it's like truly I can slip into a lot of white spaces and be fine. And then, and then every so often it will be like, oh, that was not appropriate for you to say to me at all. But but I have privilege in that way, and I feel like recognizing that isn't like shaming yourself, it isn't shaming other people. It's just like we're just trying to understand how things are. Like I love that you said, like we have to look at the intersections and not mush everything together because it isn't the same. It's just we're trying and finding the intersections. It's like that Venn diagram, right?
Yeah.
It's like there are different things, but there is an overlap that's important to understand. And important to like literally bonding everyone like as a community and being compassionate towards each other, not just using it to be like, well, me too, so F off. Like, what? That's not what I meant.
No facts. I mean, and speaking of the Asian community, is that the model minority myth. Mm-hmm. I just want to address that. Like first of all, we erase the Asian community off the race map because in America it's been such a black and white thing, but we also erased them off of the map. I don't know if anyone's ever seen the movie Get Out, but there was one Asian man in there, and when they were bidding him off the black guy, but he didn't know, but they were asking him questions, and the Asian guy said, "Is it worth it?" That was the only question he asked, which means, is it worth it for me to want to be black? Or should I just stay where I'm at and not be seen? Like that was and that like changed my whole perspective, on a lot. Because I grew up in Washington where it's cultural there, or at least the school I went to is very cultural. And of course we thought everyone who was in the Asian community had money. Like I just assumed that because I was like, oh yeah, they do all have money. Not even though I didn't talk to everybody, I was just like, I just assumed that. But we think because we see if they own restaurants, they're like, oh well, then they all own restaurants, which means they all have money. And it's like, no, that's false. Anyways, yeah. I wanted to address that. So I was like, guys, people need to know that.
Yeah, and I mean, like, that's what's so interesting, because I feel like a lot of the things that are dividing us is that we just don't know because we just don't see a lot. It's so interesting to know. I'm going to go back to the gay community because, like, this is literally where I've heard a lot of examples of this and, like, have had to talk about this, where it's just like, I know people who don't think that gay couples should be able to adopt. They just don't think that's real. They think, like you need a mother and father, they need this and that. And then I ask them, like, do you know a gay couple? Like, do you know a couple that's gay? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, maybe you should, because like, that's the thing, right? Like, and it's hard. And I was talking about this last week with my friend Tech Force, and we were talking about, like TV, and like in the 90s, like when you see black people on TV, because I was watching Charmed, every time like I saw like a non-magical black person on the show, they're like the thugs. It's always like they have guns. They're like the police are coming and stuff. And that's the only time they have them. Like there wasn't even like that random office person, like they have now to the side where it's like that guy's black over there in the corner. Like, no, it's like the only time you'll see them is they're having guns. They're like they've already been shot or they're shooting at people. And it's just like when that's all even if you don't think that's necessarily true, like that just ingrains in you, especially growing up, because like that's literally your exposure right now. Right. Like all you have is TV and whatever is in your neighborhood.
Talk about words. Like since the beginning of time, literally, black has always been seen as negative. You listen to our Shakespeare and all that stuff, and they're like, it was black and grimy and dirty. Like black has always been seen as, even though they may not have been talking about people, but you think about it, and like words are things, and we do attach words to people because I think it makes us feel safe, because now we have something to put it onto. But black has always been seen. There's always dark versus light, right?
Yes.
And whites always are light is always white, or
Yes.
good is always white, and bad is always black. I'm like, it's been this, it's everywhere. And that's another thing I try to get people to realize. And they're like, no, I've been told I've been reaching from like 5 different people. So if they watch this, yes, I'm talking about you. But at this point, I don't care anymore, but I've been told so much like, you're reaching. I'm like, no, y'all are not connecting the dots.
Yeah.
Like, connect the dots. It's all connected. It's the
Yes.
circle of life. Like, it's a real thing.
It is, like, because when you think about, like, let's talk about like the depiction of Jesus, right? Where obviously Jesus cannot be a white man because of where he was, like in Jerusalem. Like that's not in Europe. It's not, he's not a white man. He's not. So, but like the fact that like changing that image to be a white man, and then when you think of heavens and stuff like that, you think of the clouds, again, white. And it might not have been on purpose, but it's like you have to understand that's not how we associate things. Like white is clean. Like Marie Kondo like wears white all the time because she's like, that's part of my brand. Like that's clean. When you think of white, you think of pure, right? Wedding dresses are white because it's supposed to be like this virgin being given away, like purity is white, like represented by the color white. And then darkness is always bad, right? You're afraid at night. Funerals are black. I feel like did you read Heart of Darkness? I think it's Heart of Darkness where they actually address that. We're in Heart of Darkness. I'm sorry if I'm saying the wrong book. I really do think it's the Heart of Darkness, but it's been a really long time since I was in the 8th grade. But like they addressed that, and in the book it was flipped. So when things were, and it was one of the main characters like realizing this, where it was just like at the end things were getting like, I guess I'll say it, evil, and things are like we're whiting out. Like it wasn't like the blackness growing, it was like the whiteness growing. And then like that flip where it's just like, you think, because Heart of Darkness it definitely dealt with race. So it was just like that kind of thing where it's like, well, like that's like your ignorance, right? Like you think the things that you think are good aren't necessarily the good things, and they can definitely overpower reality. And so like I'm so sorry if it's really not Heart of Darkness. I really think it is. But I always thought like it was really interesting. Whatever book I'm thinking of, that picture will never leave me, because until I was in 8th grade, I never realized that like white could be bad, like, because it's just like a representation of something, but it means a lot. The fact that they use that as like a flip to make you understand like dark isn't always bad, like that was like a whoa, like mind-blowing, like connotations exist, and I think it's really ignorant to ignore the fact that they exist. Like words have connotations versus denotations. Like it's real. If we don't, that's why there's synonyms.
Yeah,
that's literally why there's synonyms, so we can find like the exact correct context. But that means that you have to understand that black and white holds so many meanings. Yeah, that was my little rant.
So everyone go read that book.
Everyone go read that book. Yeah, if it's not the right one, it's still a good book, so it's totally fine. But yeah, like those understandings are so important to have, like just words. And again, like going back to intersections. Oh my God, I would love to hear a little bit about your podcast then. Please tell us. Please tell us how it's going.
It's great. I actually wanted to put out like episodes every other Thursday, but every week something happens. So I'm like, I gotta put this out now. So it's called House of Hippie, which is spelled XIPPI. And then house is just spelled regular house, because in the voguing world, it could be spelled HAUS, I believe.
Oh, yeah, like yes.
And so and then there's also house dancing. That's actually a real style. And since I've been out here in New Mexico, in Las Cruces, younger people usually cling to me, but they always like, you're like my mom. And I'm like, what? And it doesn't bother me. I'm like, because I have more feminine mannerisms. And so I'm like, okay. And then my best friend, I call him my twin. He's like, you have like a house. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, you have people, like, you have these kids, like, they look up to you. I was like, eh. So then I just started kind of playing around, like, oh, House of Hippie. And when I found out the word hippie, it means to be aware or to open one's eyes. And
Oh,
so pretty much translates to House of Awareness is what it would translate to. But of course, so hippie comes from the Wolof language, but some white man said it's not true because they don't have the H sound in their language. I'm like, okay, so leave it up to you to say that it's not true. But I'm like, I must take it and say it is true. So that's how the name came about. So, and then also obviously like bringing in my intersectionality, so like blackness and being gay and how do I merge those? And I'm just really talking about in the hip hop world specifically how whatever subjects come up. So I've talked about the erasure of blackness in hip hop. Recently, there's like been a lot of stuff going on in LA with the commercial world of hip hop and certain people saying the N word and they're not black and who can say it, who can't say it. I got shut down from that from the girl who said it. She was like, "You're late." And I'm like, "I'm late. You're late because it's 2020. You still thought it was okay for you to say the N word, and you're not black, you know." And not that I'm trying to attack people, but because I remember when I contacted you, and I was like, I love what people are saying, but I also listen to what people are not
saying.
You know, and not like, oh, you should have said this. It's just like, oh, I'm listening to what you're not saying or what can be addressed. So that's how that incident happened, and it just wasn't appreciated. I'm also reviewing certain hip hop dances that I feel like are important to the hip hop community. Because we have a 4-step critique that my mentor, Dr. Deborah Knapp, gave us, so how to critique dances. But I'm not critiquing, I'm just reviewing because I'm not. First of all, it's on computers. I can't say how it could be better, you know. And then the concept video, so you don't get the whole picture, but just giving people, all of us, me too, giving us more tools on how to appreciate hip hop dance and how do we look at it with a different lens? Because I have had the privilege to go to college and train in other styles, but then also have been able to realize how blackness is not even like blackness is not appreciated. It's not appreciated in these styles, and even though we've contributed to it, you know, in ballet, you know, I just talked about this in my last podcast, but people saying, you know, ballet is the mother of all dance, and I'm like, but didn't y'all say everything started in Africa?
Yeah.
So where's the connection with that? But you know, and for all people of color, we don't see us in ballet until who knows when, you know, like it's just always been this white thing. But even in modern, you know, and because modern broke the boundaries or whatever of ballet, like, oh, we're not going to do lines, but it's white women, like you're telling us like these white women founders, and I'm like, we've been dancing like all other races, all other countries, like we've been on this, we've been moving. It was new to white people, like y'all were very, you know, stiff. There's a whole article that talks about when white people take, especially like African classes, because it's moving so much in the lower, like why they always break down and cry. And I've noticed that too, like not being funny, but white people will cry a lot in like African classes and like where there's a lot of sacral movement. I'm like, why are they crying? But because they were saying like it's how it's connected to the emotions, and you know, they're releasing something. Because if you look at their history, they've always walked upright. They've been soldiers. Violence has been, you know, is so breaking that down. But yeah, so just really diving into hip hop and why it's important, and how do we get rid of our unconscious bias or our known bias, because sometimes people know their bias and they just don't care. But it's just like hip hop's not as appreciated, you know, and even down here it's not appreciated. People are like, oh, hip hop's it's because it's popular, and I'm like, popular? Like it's always been pop. I mean, if we're gonna say the word popular, it's always been a thing to me. So I don't know why you're saying it's popular. Like they're acting like it's just in for now. I'm like, hip hop's always been in.
Yes, that is so interesting. Okay, that you bring that up, because like, so I grew up listening to hip hop because I have an older brother and that's what he listened to. So, you know, when you have older siblings, you copy them because that's what you do, you know, and then they pick what you listen to, you know, they pick the radio stations and everything. So like I listened to R&B and hip hop. My brother, like he was a break dancer. So I was like, okay. So like I know who DJ Kool Herc is. I know who Afrika Bambaataa is because of that. But so like I understand what you're saying, and then it's been so interesting because I actually talk about that too, especially because like after you graduate from college, a lot of us teach dance at studios that want to compete, or like these different things, and like it's so interesting because like the rise of it's like the rise of commercial hip hop.
Yeah.
Right. Is like, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It just comes with not so great things sometimes, because it's like, who are they hiring for that? Like, what parts of hip hop are they actually pushing to show?
Mm-hmm.
And like, how does it have to look? I'm thinking of right now like Hamilton in my head, and like how much like I loved Hamilton as a piece of art, but also Hamilton is just very like, there's a lot of debate about Hamilton right now, but just like thinking of like the dancing in Hamilton, how it's like, it's hip hop based, but everything is super like clean line, everything like, and it was beautiful, like as a piece, and like great performers, everything, but like also just like that's still there. Like they did cool stuff with colorblind casting, but there's this still whole thing where it's like, this is all kind of whitewashed. And I've had friends be like, Hamilton is like rap for white people. And I'm like, I can see that, but like hip hop is an interesting place to talk about now because it is more popular, right? Like when you think about, oh my gosh, what's her name? Because I don't really know her, but it was like, do you watch Drag Race Canada? So no, it's totally fine. I'm just asking because like, this girl did like JoJo Siwa. Do you know who JoJo Siwa is? Okay. So I'm bringing this up because I feel like there are a lot of like, JoJo Siwa's white. She was on Dance Moms. And like, even like also like with like Disney stars and stuff, right? Where like hip hop became like a thing, like dabbing and everything, with like things being cool. Like if you ever watched freaking Fuller House, like, like DJ Tanner saying "on fleek" was really weird. It's really weird. Like those things were like Black culture, especially like with hip hop dance, like becomes like popular and more into general American culture. And then, but yeah, I don't know. It's like, I know what you know what I'm talking about. Like, it's just really interesting because it's like, this can be a good thing, but a lot of the time also it's like a bad thing because it comes with a lot of erasure.
And yes, like so much erasure. And I know when we talked before, I was telling you why I don't say hip hop is American history, because people are like, hip hop is American history. I'm like, no, it's not. It's for me, it's African history, and then it's Black history. And I don't think Black history is American history. Like, and that's okay, because unless we start telling the whole truth, but we won't tell the whole truth. So I'm like, we have to separate this. But like you said, the commercial world, and these are the people I'm getting into it with. They're in the commercial world, and the hip hop team I was on, to me it was more commercial. We may not have done actual videos, but it was still more commercial to me. And then having this academics, and then me being able to combine those are intersectionalities, and realizing like America will pick and choose what they think a culture is. So they'll say, this is hip hop. And I'm like, no, that's not, but when they do that, they're erasing Black people. And then you have other non-Black people who see hip hop and like, oh, I see me. And then when I come back with, whether I come from experience, which people say no, or if I come from research, they still tell me no. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't know what else you want me to tell you. They don't believe me. They're like, no, because they see themselves. Like, so my experience doesn't become valid to them for some odd reason. And I'm like, okay, I'm telling you I literally live this every day, or I'm telling you that I've researched this even more, but you're still saying no. But it's because what America shows, like, oh, this is what hip hop is. I'm like, no, that's not all it is. you know. And it's interesting because some people get either the whitewash version or they get the very, like you were saying, the thug version. Like Black people are, you know, these thugs. And I listen to both. Like I listen to Lauryn Hill. I love Lauryn Hill, but I also listen to the baby. I need a clean, nice balance in my life. So I listen to both. But you know, and so but how even in Blackness we're so dissected. Like, you know what I mean? Because some people are like, this is hip hop. I'm like, no, that's all hip hop. But no, this is how I'm like, no, that's it's all the same thing. But Blackness has been so dissected because think about all the names that they gave us, and when they started to whitewash us out physically, you know, Mendel's law of having an all white family, having an all Black family, boom, they have a kid, they come out lighter. This lighter kid put them with a white person. You know, you start washing out physically. Now you're washing us out physically. You're washing us out historically. I mean, but that's everywhere, you know, because even so, when I do call my child Charisma, she's half Thai and half white, and she talks about. I remember I brought up a comedian was saying they couldn't go anywhere in China because all the lotions had bleaching cream. He's like, I can't use any of this, you know. And she was saying that her grandma would send her bleaching creams and she used it. So I don't know how darker she was, but she was like, no, I used to be a little darker than this. So I'm like, so the erasure of Blackness is everywhere, you know, like Blackness is just wants to be erased. So, and that's another thing I try to like. So when it does come to other cultures, you know, and me being in a predominantly Latinx culture, I see the difference between, well, they're dark Mexican or Hispanic, and I'm like, what? Like y'all do that too? Well, colorism is what it boils down to, right? But yeah, I'm just, I don't know. The erasure of Blackness is, yeah, it's in us physically. It's in our history. It's on TV. Yeah, people are not connecting those dots. I'm like, no.
No, they're not connecting those dots. And that's the thing that's, again, it's just like, I feel like people, again, I don't know. Some people take things and instead of like, just like seeing it for what it is. And also, again, like, let's talk about, let's go back to your example, right? Like when you have like a mixed baby, like if my boyfriend and I get married and have children, like we plan, but I don't know, like, you know, like it will be half Filipino, half white. And, you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but then you do kind of have to watch out. Like, you know, like I'm already really Americanized, but I am technically an indigenous Filipino people. I have indigenous roots. But that's really easy to wipe away. You know, that history is really easy to wipe away, especially because I am in America. Like I was lucky and I grew up, my parents with other people who were indigenous from the same provinces in the Philippines. They started a chapter of BIBOC, which is like this international organization for Igorot people. And so I was lucky that I had that in my history at all. But like knowing that, you know, there are a lot of Filipino people who don't know that much about their history besides like where their parents came from and like more so their family lineage. But I had like the up and up because of my parents. So I actually learned our cultural dances. I learned how to play some of our instruments, like our bamboo instruments. I learned how to play the gongs a little bit. But like, I think about that now, like I'm not part of those organizations right now. And like, how easy is that going to be to erase for my child if I don't actively go for it, where it's just like, yes, it's important, but also like life happens. Like, what if I move somewhere and I'm not somewhere where there's a chapter at all, and I can give my child books and stuff, but like, it's just recognizing like it's easy to erase. Like that can be like an intersection. Like we can see like my child as like an intersection and they could grow up as someone who understands different sides of things, or my child can grow up and be like, F you! Like, I know what it's like to be this. And so I won't listen to your, like, you know, I won't listen to whatever you think is happening to you. Like, again, like, it's just like so interesting like that. But like, because erasure is so, it's important to realize, like, you know, it's like erasure versus like integrating, and which one are you doing?
Right.
Like, which one? Like, that's like a big thing with intersecting, right? Like, at this point, are you going to erase things? Or are you going to actually try to integrate and incorporate and understand? Which one? Like, which one do you want to do?
And a lot of my friends, their wives or girlfriends fiancés at this point. They have kids together, but they're biracial. And, I'll talk to the guys, because that's who I was friends with originally. And they'll they'll have conversations, and the wives, not that they didn't believe it, but they start to see the looks that they get. Because you can tell when someone's mixed with something, usually. Like, yeah, it may be a stereotype, but stereotypes exist for a reason because there's some truth to it. So usually at least for me, I can definitely tell when someone's mixed with black. I'm like, they have black in them. I can just tell. But, so if I can tell, I'm pretty sure other people can tell, but the looks that they start to get, then it starts to bring this awareness to them, like, oh, this is real, But it takes that intersection of that, like, oh, I have this child. I'm like, if you would have known that before. And I think also it comes with guilt because, like you're saying, it's not a blame thing and it's not to beat yourself up, but
you froze. I'm sorry. Wait, can you go?
It's like this.
Can you go back? You froze for a second. Can you go back to you're saying like it's not to blame people or shame people, and then please continue.
Yes, I was like, I froze. I started moving. Yes, so it's not like you said. It's not to blame or shame people, but I feel as though when we become aware of this awareness, all these emotions and all these memories flood back in, where we see that we contributed to something. And I'm like, but that's not it either. Like, it's not to beat yourself up. It really isn't. It's just awareness. Like, we need more awareness. But it's just interesting to me that sometimes it takes a child to bring awareness, or it takes something extreme when we've already gave you the resources,
Yes.
Raven Wiggs. I keep Wings. Raven Wings, I believe is how you pronounce her name. I keep posting that video because she spoke so eloquently. I was like, she's like, we already did the work for you. Like, we did the petitions, it's in our art, we did the research, like, it's here. So yeah. Sorry, I'm just thinking, like, bringing in children and how, like, does it have to be that extreme intersectionality of that, or extreme, making of something to understand.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. Like, it's weird because it almost seems like people won't learn until it personally affects them, like in a very overt way.
Yeah.
Which again is why we wanted to talk about intersectionality, because that's
exactly.
part of what brings us together. Like, this affects us all. Like, the Black Lives Matter movement, like, encompasses a lot of things. Like, for trans people, right? Black trans lives matter as well. Like, we're not just saying cis straight black males, like, it's like, no. Black lives matter. So that includes all these different people. And like, that's like the beauty of what can come, right? Because if you think about that, that's also like women's rights. And like, going back to like what you were saying in the beginning, like, who is this movement speaking for, right? When you think about feminism, a lot of the time it's just like white women's suffrage for white women, yeah. Like, when you think about like history and movies and what were you taught, you weren't taught that, yeah, the black women had to vote later. Like, that didn't come until like later on. Like, when we meant women's suffrage, they actually meant white women's suffrage.
And gay rights, Marsha P. Johnson, rest in power, rest in peace. That was when I had to check my privilege, because she was like, no, when she didn't say cisgendered, but when cisgendered, gay, or LGBT people got their rights to marry, they left the whole group because they were like, oh, well, we got what we wanted. But then now you look at the death rate of transgender and how they're not protected, and how they don't have the same rights as a black transgendered woman does not have the same rights as me. And I have to be aware of that. Like, I have to be aware of that, so, but I had to bring in my intersectionality, and then my privileges and my advantages and my oppression and disadvantages. And what I did, for me, when I labeled for where I'm at right now, my privileges outweighed my oppression for where I'm in, for the area I'm in right now. And so really just being able to be aware of that and to investigate it. And like I said, some things had to be interrogated. I definitely had to interrogate more of myself when it comes to non-abled Black people. I don't even think about because I don't have to. Because if you look at everything, everything's so accessible to me as an able-bodied person. Like I said, when I go to Walmart, my friend and I, we just like to park super far because we just park right there all the time. But that's a privilege for me to be able to park that far and not have to worry about, oh, is there any handicap spots? Or someone doesn't have to drop me off and then they have to go find a parking spot, or they don't have to get my wheelchair. You know what I mean? Like, and how many baskets are there? Like, go to Walmart, how many regular pushing baskets are there compared to ones that if there's someone who's non-able-bodied, or non-able? Like, that's a privilege. So that's what I want people to look at. Like, and then you start noticing the little things. It's a privilege to have a car. It's a privilege to have a laptop. It's a privilege to have a cell phone. Like, it's just the facts. Like, and then how you use those can give you an advantage. Me having a cell phone, scratch that. This right here is a privilege for me. You have this platform. I have a laptop. There could be someone who wants to speak and they don't have a laptop. That's so just being able to be like, oh, I have an advantage. And that's it. I'm not using it to oppress anyone, but now it brings awareness to me if I am oppressing someone.
Yes. And I'm so glad you said that. You're bringing this up. Like, again, like this is going to be a common theme of this, where I keep pointing this out, but like, it's just like, you are an educated man. You can recognize your own privilege, and look, it's not hurting you. Like, it's not hurting you. And if anything, like, it motivates you. Like, you started your own podcast. Like, that's the thing that I feel like some people don't realize. Like, when you're privileged and you realize it, you actually, it's kind of a good thing. It's not kind of, it is a good thing, because then you realize what you can do. Like, what can you do? Like, exactly like this, right? Not everyone can do this.
Right.
Like, this is definitely a privilege. Like, I have a mic. I have like light. I have, like, access to like talk to other people. I have people who are willing to like connect me to others, like Morgan connect me to you. Not everyone has that. Not everyone actually is in a place where they feel like it's safe for them to talk, like, about what they want to talk about. Like, I have lots of freedom because I don't work for anybody. So, like, I work for myself. So, like, well, right now, but even if I was working, my boss wouldn't care. She was on the show. But, like, other people, like, don't feel like they can say anything because it's like, well, I might risk my job. Like that is a privilege. The fact that, like, like, I can go up here and, like, I have internet that's fast enough to have this. Like, I'm not in an area where, like, my internet is really bad. Like, that's a privilege. And, like, what can you do with your privileges? You could make something to help other people. Like, that's the part that can be cool about being privileged. It's like, what can I do with it? I can do something good. Like, you talk about, like, in yours, intersectionality and, like, hip hop a lot. And I feel like those are really important things to talk about that not a lot of people are able to talk about. And you also, like, because you have your master's degree, and that's amazing, and that gives you more information to come from. Like, you have all this background knowledge that, like, I don't, not just with, like, your experience in your life, but also just like that, like, different forms of things that you have that I don't. And that's great because you're sharing them. Like, and that's, like, the cool part. Like, privilege doesn't have to be, like, always feel like this. Like, Bill,
right?
Because, like, no one's trying to boo anyone unless you're using, like, your privilege to uphold white supremacy. Like, that's when everyone's just like, yes,
I think that's a very thin line. That's a very thin line for white people. I think they get so I mean, I don't know, I'm not white, but it's from what I can see, it looks like they get confused because they're like, well, but people say, like, now I'll bring up the white savior complex. I just posted about that because someone just made a video, but I'm not going to go there. But, they're like, well, I know I'm privileged, but I don't know how to help. I'm like, okay, when you're privileged and it's one thing when you're helping and you're like, look at what I did, because that's not what it's about. It's not about what you did. Like, that's your job as a human being, is to help, but that's why it gets so blurred for me when it comes to white people. Like, when I see them doing stuff, I'm like, that is such a white savior complex. That's such a, oh, look how I'm helping. And I'm like, you should have been helping. Like, you should just be helping because you want to help, not because all of a sudden there's this, you feel like there's this weight held over you, that, like, you have to show that you're helping, or, and you don't have to be the face of something, you know. And I always tell people like how. So going back to intersectionality, you know, when you're at the table, when you're at a table with people, the first thing I do for actually, I always make it about me. When I'm at the table with a group of people, the first thing I do is I look and I see who's not there. I always look to see who's not there. Because then it's interesting how you'll hear other people start to speak about those bodies that are not there. I'm like, you don't come from that. So if I'm at a table with, like I said, for me, because it's for me to address myself more. But if I'm at a table with all able-bodied people, and then we're starting talking about like how can we do this for non-able people, we don't know. I mean, we think we know, but at the end of the day, we really don't know. It could sound like a great idea to us, but we need to get someone at this table, and we need to learn to be quiet and let them eat off the table. Because, yeah, that's, you know, and for me, that's where all Black Lives Matter is coming. I don't know where that came from. I didn't know that was a thing until I saw it painted. I was like, what? I was like, okay. I thought Black Lives Matter. I thought we already knew this, but apparently we didn't. So somewhere it had to get addressed. And I'm like, yeah, who's not at this table? You know, and I watch things with it's all Black people talking. I'm like, this person's missing, this person's missing, this person's not here. There's not a mixed person there. There's not someone from the African diaspora who's not there, because that's important, because that's a whole different Black experience. You know, is someone in LGBTQIA, we keep getting just gay people, or, you know, gay and lesbians is what I keep seeing. Is, you know, these cisgender gay and lesbian Black men and women, and I'm like, okay. But even in the little personalities in that is that, like, okay, there's not every gay guy is feminine. Not every Black gay guy has to be feminine. Like, we also have to look at, like, there's so many things that need to be dismantled at looking at, you know, it. And for those of you who are watching, I know it may seem confusing, but once you start to really grasp what intersectionality is, you'll see that what I'm saying is intersectionality. Like, you do start breaking it down to the little minute things, because it is very important. Because if their voice is not heard, we think that we're making progress. When actually, in the book I read, she was saying, by the time you get to the end of where you think you made progress, you're going to turn around and see that you became the oppressor.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah. So the first time I heard the phrase, nothing about us without us, the first time I heard that phrase was when I was researching autism, because hold on, I am pretty sure it's Autism Speaks. Okay, I'm going to say this, and if I'm hella wrong, I'm so sorry, but I'm pretty sure I'm right, because I remember being like, well, that's ironic. So, like, you know, there's autism, there's different autism networks for advocacy, and Autism Speaks. You know what? Actually, I should look at this really quick, because this is really bad to say if I'm hella wrong. Right. Autism. So basically, there are different autism advocacy groups, and some of them talk about people with autism without having anyone at the table. They make their policies about people with autism without anyone with autism on their boards, or like in places of power. Bad. I'm literally going bad. Okay, yeah, it is. It is Autism Speaks, which is weird, right? Because it's called Autism Speaks, but in Autism Speaks, that organization, they had a long history of not including anyone with autism until people finally started speaking up. And then they finally started asking people, but I still don't think it's going very well from what I remember. But that was also a year ago, so maybe it's better by now. But like, that's the thing, right? Like, you can think you're helping out people, but if you don't include them at the table, if you don't actually listen to what they're saying, if they're met with defensiveness and you not believing them because you've never felt that, then did you really help? Like, did you?
Did you? Like, the answer is going to be no. It's a hard no for me.
Yeah, it's a hard no. And the thing is, like, knowing that, again, it's not supposed to be. Sometimes it is about shame, because sometimes it's like, yeah, Autism Speaks, you should feel bad about yourself. You should feel bad as an organization about yourself. But, you know, in the way where you should feel bad, so fix it, please. Not, you should feel bad and now, like, go burn Like, that's not, like, that's not what people are saying. It's just like, let's know these things. Yeah, of course, guilt's going to come, but like that needs to stop and we need to like move on. We need to feel like, oh yeah, that sucks. I did really bad. And, obviously that's really simple. But, at some point you have to push away your personal feelings because the whole thing isn't about you. Like, that's the thing.
Like, really never about you if it's not about you. Like, if it's not you, then it can't be about you. Yeah, but I like that you said that, and I know we both said it a couple times, like, it's not about go jump off a cliff, or like, we're not asking you to leave this space. It's because, Abraham Hicks, who's a spiritual coach, he says, once you become aware of what you don't want, you become aware of what you do want. Now you know that you don't want to act like that, so you know how you do want to act. But I also saw a post, and it said, normalize people receiving new information and changing their opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah. One, because I have a bad habit of like, no. But I'm like, no. But I'm like, yeah, actually, yeah, that is true. Once people get more information or new information, we do have to give them the space to change their opinion,
Yeah. I totally agree. And we need, to give people space if they're actually trying in earnest to like make those mistakes, and forgive them. And it's not saying like, trust everybody. That's not what I'm saying, because that is false. Do not trust everybody. But, but if someone makes a mistake and you don't think they're being earnest, like, give them some time to actually correct it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't just like dismiss them and cancel them forever. Because, it's just like, I think especially now in this work, I really want to believe that people can change. Like, I do already believe that people can change, but especially concerning things like these, I really have to believe that people can change. Or what are we doing now?
Yeah, that's how I felt 2 years ago, because I've been saying this. I mean, not that obviously I'm not the founder or creator of Black Lives Matter, but I was saying this in 2018 and was getting a lot of shit from people, like a lot. And a lot of people have came back and apologized, and and I forgive them, because I'm like, I'm not about to hold this against you, because that takes more out of me, But what did you say? I just went blank.
Like, we have to give people space. We have to forgive them. We have to believe that they can change. Or like, what are we doing? What are we doing here if we don't believe people can change?
Yeah, both of those things. I'm like, that's what I ask people. I'm like, okay, we're saying Black Lives Matter, and then if someone is genuinely apologizing and whatever the case may be, but I do ask, my fellow Black people, like, are we just here to be mad? Because that's not going to work here. Like, we're doing this for a reason. Like, what reason? And I mean, I'm really happy, because this is the longest I've ever seen stuff go on. Because I remember 2 years ago, it was like, Black Lives Matter. Okay, we're done. Yeah. Oh, Black Lives Matter. Okay, we're done. But like, people are still posting on their stories, still posting on their posts. I'm like, oh, so whatever we're doing something right this time. I feel like, but yeah, same thing. That question stays in my mind though. Like, what are we doing? Like, where are we trying to get? Where's our end goal? For all of this.
Yeah. And it's hard, and like having to understand that like this work is really new for a lot of us. It's new for me. Like, and I made a post about this the other day, because like I know, like, and that's the thing, like, I'm so for people just admitting their mistakes and everything, or just like admitting that, it's hard, because I feel like so many people are discouraged because they don't want to say, like, it feels like this, they don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to make that mistake. But I'm just like, oh no, this translates into people not trying or people staying silent. And it's just like, like, again, like I posted this like the other day, like, because you were talking about like white savior, right? And stuff like that. Like, I know I had a really bad savior complex growing up. Like, and I know it comes from trauma. It came from like a place of me being young, trauma mixed with love, not knowing what to do. So what do? Save everybody, like, and like, it took me a really long time to, one, become aware of that, and then two, to fucking stop. But like, I also have to know that like, I'm not going to be perfect. And I have to know like, that's going to be an automatic knee-jerk reaction for me to anyone for anything, but especially something I feel passionate about. And, like, those are things you have to, just like recognizing your privilege, like recognize your behavior patterns.
Yeah.
You know, recognize when you are acting wrong and from like a savior place. Like recognize like when you're centering yourself, you know, like, are you helping out with this movement because you don't want to actually deal with the shit that's going on in your life? Like, this is actually easier to you, like, because then you're doing something else now, you know,
Right.
and you might not mean to, like, you might, you know, you might literally think you're helping, and it doesn't erase all the help you're doing. It's just like, that's like an internal battle thing that you have to like discuss with yourself and really become aware. Because if you're not, then in the end, you are going to be one of those people who looks back and go, oops, like, I'm impressed. Like, I was actually oppressing you the whole time.
Right.
And you don't want to do that. And it's just like, it's okay to have these conversations. Like, and I'm, unfortunately, I can see people like watching our conversation and just being like, these two people are so negative and so hateful and so whatever. But I'm like, no, but we're not though. It's okay to address tough things, and it's okay to say how things look and how we're experiencing them, and knowing that that's not how other people are going to experience them.
Right.
But also hoping like, also like, we both want to talk because there's some, we have that intersection. We have the things that, like, you know, we want Black lives to matter. We want to end like white supremacy. So we're talking. Is it always going to be perfect? No. I'm sure like in a year from now, we're both going to have to apologize for something.
Right.
You know, and that's okay. Because again, if you don't talk, if you don't feel like you can make a mistake and stuff like that, if you don't look for these intersections, if you don't get over your, not, I don't want to say get over because that seems crude. Like, if you don't address your feelings of guilt and use them to motivate you to do better, it's going to be like you in 2018, right? Everyone's going to be like, and then like everyone be quiet again.
Exactly. And yeah, definitely. I mean, and for my podcast again, and not really the podcast, but the name, like House of Hippie, like I said, I just want awareness, like, for myself. It's like, so when I say it's never about you, what I mean is it's all about me. Like, it's not about you. What is this doing for me? Not what is this doing to me, right? And bringing this awareness, I bring a lot of life coaching tools, like when I'm doing the podcast. Well, sometimes I bring in life coaching tools. And how do you sit with that? How do you sit with your intersectionality? I'm not asking you to go talk to someone who doesn't look like you and be like, oh, this is how we're different, this is how we're alike. No, sit with yourself first, because if you're not aware of yourself, you are not going to be aware. Actually, here we go. My Lauryn Hill, one of my favorite artists, one of her speeches, she said, sometimes the enemy is hurting more than you are, even though they're doing the kicking and the beating. And, and she said she's always thought it was like, I got to battle the enemy on the outside. So, but if you can't battle the enemy on the if you can't battle the enemy on the inside, then you can't handle the enemy on the outside. So that's that's another thing what I mean when I say intersectionality is you have to sit down with that, because it was a reality check for me, because I was swear up and down, because obviously I was getting shit from other people and I was saying Black Lives Matter. So I was like, oh my God, I think I'm really oppressed out here, and da da da. And I was like writing down my privileges. I was like, when I started writing down, oppression or disadvantages, I was like, it was like 3 over there. And then my advantages is like a whole page. I was like, oh yeah, I'm pretty good. Not that these things don't matter. It depends on what space I'm in, right? Like I mentioned in the beginning, me being gay and in the Black community gives a different feel than me being Black and being in the gay community. Like, how do I navigate those? But I only know how to navigate those because I had to also how to navigate those things in myself. Because another thing that we don't realize when it comes to oppression is that we oppress certain identities in ourselves. And so sitting with that and becoming aware of those identities, and which one, because I'm telling you, I went through a struggle. I was like, all right, I gotta be Black. Like, I gotta be Black. I can't like help the gay community right now. Like, y'all by yourselves. And then like, if like someone transgender got killed, I was like, oh, I can't be Black right now. I gotta go help the gay community. Like, that's not gonna work right now. It's not gonna ever work. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I forgot. I actually think it was Morgan. She made like a post. Oh crap. Nope, my mind blanked after it. Oh, it was basically like sorry, Morgan, I guess I'm making your things public. I won't say your last name. But you know, the whole women supporting women challenge with like the black and white photos that everyone started finding out, like it was about you know, how the femicide in Turkey, you know, like it was about all that. But even before that came out, and it was just like, oh, this is more deeper than just like black and white selfies. It's like actually about like a movement and women being killed. It was also just that challenge, and she posted a thing. It's just like, you know, like she's all for women empowerment, obviously, but she felt like this trend, and I agree, like it's trends are so interesting because it like overshadowed one, and then she was just like, you know, asking how people felt about it, like how it felt off for her, but she didn't know why it felt off. And I was having those feelings too, where it's just like, it is really weird. And like also the whole like women supporting women via selfie is an interesting choice. It's an interesting choice. It's not good or bad. It depends. It just really depends. But I was just like, you know, like there's ways to intersect things. I'm like, you know, if you want to be women supporting women, like maybe you do a selfie of yourself, but also maybe you make a selfie of women who have been killed, you know, like by the cops, like women where it's more directly, like where it is intersected with Black Lives Matter, you know, women who were in protest, women who were killed, like Breonna Taylor. Like there's ways where you can intersect, and there's somewhere for you to go. And learning those ways, like the intersection, like is great. Because like, just like you, then you don't have to be like, am I for women or am I for Black lives? I gotta move this way. Like, am I for Asians or am I for Filipino people? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Like Filipinos or indigenous people. Like, and you know, like, and it gets so stressful. And it's just like realizing like at intersections, like intersections are great because you can still support, but also find your focus and keep your focus. Mm-hmm. And then also, side note, knowing that it's okay to sometimes shift your focus. Like if there's something greater right now, you know, like, you know, it's just, this is the only example that came into my head. You know, if there's like a meteor coming to crash down on the planet right now, I think everyone's going to stop giving a crap about COVID and other things. And we're going to be like, we need to kill this comet because we're going to die if we don't. And, you know, like, and focusing on that is obviously really important. That's fine when you need to shift your focus. I feel like we need to practice like shifting focus without feeling that's invalidating everything. Or how do we shift focus without it actually being forgetting about all these things? You know, that's going to be interesting.
And essentially you talk about the intersection of like Black Lives Matter, because I mean, sometimes I do be feeling the type of way. I'm like, okay, but it's really interesting. But if people will connect this way, then let's do it. But I've noticed when we start saying Black Lives Matter, all these other movements start happening. And I'm like, I think where I get frustrated because sometimes Black Lives Matter gets swept under the rug. I haven't seen it this time, but I remember like in 2018, we're like Black Lives Matter. And then not that there's anything wrong with it, but then the Latinx community is like, well, Latinx lives matter. I'm like, okay. And then, you know, then it was like women rights. I was like, what the heck? I was like, and then LGBT, the gay community came, you know, back and was like, well, what about us? I was like, when did this happen? You know? And that could be me I probably just wasn't addressing the intersectionalities. It's like, these could have been Black people speaking in these environments. It could have been a Black, you know, or biracial Latinx person who's half Black and was saying, well, my life still matters in both of these. It could have been a Black woman saying, well, now I want to say Black women's lives matter. But I just wasn't seeing that. But now that, I mean, talking with you and being able to dissect that and investigate that, it's like, yeah, there's some type of connection that people are seeing. Because when we start saying Black Lives Matter and all these other movements are happening, I'm like, well, there's some type of connection that we all have. So how do we we can move forward?
And that's the magic trick, right? Like, how are we actually going to do this? Because, you know, there are all these things that do matter. And focusing on Black lives, that's where, like, we feel like things should be right now. How that comes out, like, that is also, like, the hard part, right? Because it's just, like, I'll use the example I'm in now. Like right now, like my dance community, like my BIPOC dance community is trying to come together against racism. And obviously like that has an intersection, but it's also really interesting because we have to watch how things play out. Like I know my friends are just like, you know, this can't just play out and then like the people in charge of what's happening are all like light-skinned whatever, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like it's really interesting because it's just like we had this opportunity because Black Lives Matter started, and like it for me it falls in line because it's all about dismantling like that white white supremacy, like, and it's all part of it, but also like we do kind of have to keep our eyes open and like make sure like we're still on the mark, you know, like even though like we're fighting ourselves as a bigger community, we still can't forget like what's happening and like why we started fighting in the first place, or what, you know, prompted like this movement to also be able to happen. It's just like looking at the civil rights movement, right? Like it happened there too, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. But we also have to watch, like, we have to be there for each other. We can't just leave, like you said, right? We have to figure out how to not like run away and be like, no, I gotta be over here right now, and then then leaving that group alone. So that's gonna be, I don't know. It's really interesting. We'll see how it happens, and I'll let you know. I'll let you know how this is happening. It's gonna be really interesting. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. It's not easy, you know, like the work isn't easy. Intersectionality and understanding what it isn't easy. But I do think, you know, like you said, like it is important for healing and understanding, you know, learning how to find what connects us, to help find that motivation to be there for each other, to try to understand, not to make things equal. That's not what I'm saying. You can't be like, I get it now, we're good. It's like, no, this is not what I mean.
Right, because when people tell me they get it, I'm like, but you can't.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, you can. It's like the whole, like, you know, like empathize with people. You can kind of understand some things, but like know that, yeah, like we will never have the same experience as each other.
Ever. First of all,
ever.
Especially like, you know, when it women, you know, I'm a big advocate for anything for women, and especially Black women, because, you know, historically, I'm like, I don't know what it feels like to be a Black woman, but I know I have more privilege over a Black woman. If we're just talking about, obviously, you know, gender, they can have privilege over sexuality, but still at the end of the day, it's like, no, like I will never know, you know, what it feels like to ever be anybody but myself. That's it. And people need to understand that. Like, yeah, it's one of my biggest pet peeves is people like, I get it now. Like, or if I explain something, they're like, oh, I understand. I so get it. I'm like, no, I was not explaining it to you to get it. Like, I'm telling you I'm just bringing awareness. I'm just asking you to be aware. Yeah. But you saying, yeah. You saying you get it, it's not going to happen. No.
Yeah, because it turns into like, instead of being like, I understand what you're saying, like I cognitively can follow your words and why that would hurt, it's turning into like, no, I get you now. And it's like, those are different things. Like, you can understand someone without like fully ever understanding, because that just is how it's going to be. And again, that's not something that should separate us. That's not something that should just be like gatekeeping each other from like being compassionate towards each other. That's just is like, that's just what it is. And that's okay. You don't have to fully get something to understand that it's bad. You know, like the Holocaust, most of us have never experienced the Holocaust, and we can all understand that that was bad. Genocide is bad, you know, but you can't go up to like a survivor and be like, oh, I understand. It's just like, no, dude, no. Like,
and it goes back to what you were saying in the beginning when someone says, if you're like, well, I get it because I grew up poor. but you didn't grow up Black, so you don't get it.
No, it's different, you know, and that doesn't, again, like, that doesn't invalidate your experience. That's not what anyone's trying. No one's trying to invalidate you. We're just trying to say, like, you have to understand the differences, because if you don't, then you end up hurting the other person. Like, that's the thing. That's why we need to recognize it. It's not so you feel bad about yourself. It's so that you actually understand that if we don't recognize these privileges and stuff, we're hurting other people. We're hurting people. If we don't see that race plays a big part in how, like, capitalism is working, you know, if we don't see how race plays into, like, school to prison pipelines, or just prison at all, or the war on drugs, we're hurting people. We're hurting Black people. We're literally hurting Black people if you're not understanding that, like, race has a lot to do with how these things have come to actual be, you know, like how, like, the application of all these things, of how capitalism has played out, how, like, the school to prison pipeline has played out, how, like, why marijuana was, like, such a big deal for, like, a long time. Like, you got like
yeah. Now it's safe for white women to do it while they're doing yoga.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Oh my God, we've gone past an hour.
We did.
So time to wrap up, and obviously this went by really quickly.
It did.
Okay. I will leave you with this question to answer, and feel free to repeat things, or say new things. So why is intersectionality important?
Intersectionality is important because it allows us the accessibility to become aware of ourselves, but also to have conversations with people who may not be around us, and how we can be an access to them, how they become an access for us to certain things and certain resources. It's really to bring, it sounds cliche, but whatever. I've reached that age, I guess I'm 29. It's for us to really to become one. Like, it is for us to become one, and to see that we all do play a part. We all play a part in everyone's community in some shape, way, or form. And the last thing I want to say is just this quote: after you investigate yourself, so write down your advantages and your privileges, write down your disadvantages and oppression, and then see how those navigate in your everyday life. But the quote by Alice Walker says, "When the axe came into the forest, the trees said, 'The handle is one of us.'"
That's it. That's a good quote. Ouch. That's a good quote. Thank you so much for being here and having this conversation. The super candid and just, like, very, like, well, this is just what we're saying. You're gonna have to deal with it. And it's really cool to hear, like, the different things you have to say, and, like, your opinions on things and where you're coming from. Like, just, like, hearing, like, another voice is like so great. It's so great, and you come with so much knowledge and so much passion. I want to say that when Jeremy listened to my live show with Aisha, and it was so great because, like, he had these recordings of just like him analyzing what we were talking about, just, like, purely analyzing what we were talking about. And again, like what he said, and he really does do this, like, what are the things that we're not saying? Not to even just be like, boom, 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 you missed this, boom. It's just like, these are the things that are not being said, so let's talk about them too. Like, these are important things to say too. Also, here are the things where I feel differently about these certain topics. And it's just like, it was so great because it didn't, like, it was just, like, very straightforward. Like, it was just very straightforward, which is, like, what I enjoy, because it's like, we don't need to. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people feel, and I do this, you know, feel the need to, like, I got to give you backstory and, like, context so that you know exactly what I'm saying, and that I'm not saying this, I'm not saying that. And, you know, like, I do that a lot in this podcast, just because I want people to actually listen and not to be turned off. but like it was just so cool to get that feedback from you. That was so straightforward and it was so great, and that's why I was excited to have you, because this man has great ideas. This man has great ideas. He's willing to talk about things people don't want to talk about, and he'll bring them up, and that's the great part, because like that's a part of how we all hold each other accountable. So Jeremy, thank you so much for being here with your energy, your knowledge, your passion, your hilariousness.
I've cast the mystery a couple times. Like,
yeah, it's really has been really great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So everyone listening or who will be listening in the future, if you know of someone who would want to listen to something like this, it will be on my Facebook page. It will be on my YouTube. You can go there. Also, please look to the bottom scrolling. First, there's Jeremy. You can find him on Instagram because he's not on Facebook, so don't try. Or you can also look for his podcast, House of Hippie, spelled Zippy, Xippi. Just so you know that. Don't look for like hippie. Like don't look for like an H. It's not going to happen. So he has his podcast there, and you can find it on his Instagram. And also, if you have, if you are available to, please consider donating to Dee Dee McClure's San Diego Bailout Fund. It's our local San Diego grassroots bailout organization. So please remember, people are still protesting. People still need help. And that's going to be happening for a while, so don't worry. Don't worry. And they also do things. They've also existed before this recent surge in the Black Lives Matter movement. So they've existed and they'll still exist. Hopefully, whatever this gets resolved, they're still going to exist, and they have a focus on helping Black and brown mothers. So always think about donating to them, even if it's like 5 years from now. Please consider doing that. And everyone, have a great rest of your day. Bye.